Talking points. The police are evil. Most of these talking points come about from the same user. A lot of the talking points are the result of an anecdotal experience that is alleged to have happened. Let's begin. The state uses the threat of rape in prison to gain your obedience. I have had the cops threaten me with it. This comment came from the same commenter that declared that the Internal Revenue Service of the United States of America threatened to have him raped in prison. This is the same user who declared that police threatened to have him put into a rape room, and is nothing more than an anecdote that isn't worth the paper it's written on. There are processes and procedures in place within most Western countries specifically to prevent exactly the kind of conduct this user alleges has happened to them, and even assuming that the claims are accurate, the exception does not necessarily disprove the rule. You can't fight City Hall. The scales are tipped in favour of the government's jackbooted thugs that call themselves police. The response to this claim was to point out that police officers have, and do, get prosecuted for stepping outside the bounds of their duties and or for committing crimes. The response by the commenter who made this suggestion was to claim that the majority of officers get away with their crimes. Needless to say, he didn't present any evidence for this claim. But even assuming that this is true, that does not prove the analogy correct. You can fight City Hall, to use the phrase, and you can be successful. Many documented cases are on record. If I, quote, arrested, end quote, you, would you not consider that to be kidnapping and assault? If I were arrested by a civilian on the street, yes, I would consider that to be unlawful detention, because that civilian does not have the authority vested in him by the government to carry out police duties. If I were arrested by a police officer who has been lawfully appointed to his position by the government of my country, and they had no evidence of a crime, no suspicion of a crime in progress, and could not demonstrate evidence of a crime in progress, I would sue them for false arrest, even if they legally had the power to do so. If I were arrested by a police officer in the lawful execution of their duties for a crime that they had reasonable suspicion I had committed, then intellectual and ethical integrity would require that I submit myself to the arrest because they have the right to enforce the law. I would not consider it kidnapping, and anyone who cannot grasp this distinction needs to seek advice from a professional legal expert or psychiatrist. But then again, my ethics don't allow me to consider the idea that going out, getting drunk and being heavily intoxicated in public and on the street is a reasonable state of mind to be in, so I would never be placed in that situation to begin with. If I want to go out for a drink or two with friends, I arrange a taxi home at the end of the night and wait indoors for it, rather than take to the streets and behave like a fucking moron. All police officers are corrupt, and are thugs paid for by stolen money by the mafia known as government. This one stems from the obvious assumption that police officers do not have a right to enforce the rule of law, and that the government has no legitimacy. It is also a generalization that is neither appropriate nor fair, equivalent to fundamentalist Christians who claim that prayer works, focusing on all the successes of praying, while ignoring the vast majority of prayers that were completely and utterly unsuccessful. The same applies here, and that people who make this claim are focusing on the news stories and the anecdotes of corrupt police officers and government officials who are newsworthy, while ignoring the vast majority of police officers and government officials who work within their duties and do not become corrupt. The mafia does not own property. They steal it or purchase it using the proceeds of criminal endeavours. They also collect money from people they have no legal right to collect from. This is how they run their criminal activities. Government, on the other hand, has title to the territory you reside in, not to a house you bought, but to the land that your house sits on. A more practical example may help. An owner has a house on the hill and decides to split that property into two, with access to the second property requiring access via a portion of the first. In order for the new property owner of the second property to get to his home, he requires access to that portion of the first property that allows him to get to his home. Allowing that access in the sale of the home is called an easement, and once that property is owned by someone else, the owner of the first property cannot enforce his property rights over the first property in order to prevent the owner of the second property from getting home. Purchasing a plot of land in a territory does not give you governing rights over that land. Those are not for sale. The governing rights over that land are already granted to the government who controls that territory. Only they have the rights to cede those rights to others, and they do not have to do so in the process of land ownership transfers. Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe threats, coercion, mass murder, torture, kidnap and theft are the best ways of organizing society and solving complex social problems and funding large-scale projects. This one is an obvious appeal to emotion coupled with an appeal to ridicule. No one who is arguing for the necessity of government over a territory is arguing that murder or torture are the best ways of organizing society, solving complex social problems, or organizing large-scale projects. The rest, threats, coercion, kidnap, and theft, are strawman arguments. The definition of enforcement of the law is not threats. The definition of requiring people to comply with the law under threat of punishment for disobeying the law is not coercion. The arrest of criminals who break the law is not kidnap. The collection of taxes from your income or property purchases is not theft, and no amount of weasel wording is going to change that. Now, I'm sure there are other talking points of a similar nature, and if there is anything that I haven't already addressed before, I will do so in a future video.